China's real estate has two ticking time bombs. This time, a property giant 4 times the trouble of Evergrande is failing. What does this all mean? Welcome to China Insider, I'm David Zhang. Country Garden is a name you might think it's a local dim sum place, but it's a real estate developer. Well, it's actually the biggest ticking time bomb in China right now. Along with the Evergrande situation started in 2021, this other real estate developer, there's 2 existing landmines or bombs waiting to blow. In fact, because of the number of existing projects Country Garden has, 3,000 to be precise, versus the 700 Evergrande had at the time, this is at least 4 times more troublesome. In other words, a company that has 3,000 buildings unable to sell is failing to make interest payments, by the way, to US-based creditors, and at the same time, they have no way to claw back the money from those buildings. And yeah, their money reaches the trillions range, larger than some countries' GDP. So guess what happens? Internal combustion, kaboom. And the CCP can't really do anything about it. Now, what does this all mean for us? Well, Country Garden has US investments involved, like I said, so it seems like your money is impacted. Also, China is broke. So no matter what happens, the second largest economy in the world has a big economic problem in its real estate sector. So it seems anything that happens on a large scale could impact us directly. And it's gotten to a point where no logical economy policies taught at Harvard Business School will fix it. The only way is how the CCP's hardcore policies will force people to comply and see what they come up with. In other words, right now, there are 2 ticking time bombs waiting to blow up. The only diffuser on hand, everybody, banks, consumers, and property developers themselves, they're all waiting for is the CCP. But what can the Chinese Communist Party really do? All this is their own doing. Let me explain. It's very simple. The Chinese real estate sector, which accounts for about 30% or more of its economy, is not recovering, and it could impact their overall attempt to revive the economy. Yes, China is not some grandiose, happy place as we all thought. And the CCP is not going to topple just yet. However, to explain the Country Garden situation, we have to go back to Evergrande. Since 2021, we've been hearing a name called Evergrande, and it's a real estate company holding 700 developing projects. At the time, it was declaring a default. In fact, now we know Evergrande held liabilities at 2.44 trillion yuan, and that's about 340 billion US dollars at the end of last year. So its current liabilities sit at about 1.7 trillion yuan. Evergrande posts losses of $81 billion US dollars over 2 years as it reports long delayed results. Now, these are some big numbers. Liabilities basically mean that how much of the properties that they have, essentially money they've lost, and how many dead on arrival projects they still have. And basically it's what they're liable to pay. But guess how much money they have on hand to pay back? 9 billion RMB. Okay, so 1.7 trillion in trouble versus 9 billion on hand. That's T versus B. We don't need math to figure this one out. That's like having $100 in your bank account and your credit cards are all maxed out at 20K, but like 10 different credit cards. They're all maxed out. What did the Chinese government do? Well, they essentially tried to bail out Evergrande by dispersing the impact through multiple state banks, or at least that's what we thought they were going to do. But the situation's gotten worse. Follow me because this part is getting so interesting. Now, before we do though, let me just tell you about my sponsor today. Blueberry Quality Products carries some of the best skincare products out there, including this derma roller face mask, which has intensive hydration from the hyaluronic acid. Now, I use it once a week to keep me with too much oil production, which leads me to have acne breakouts. Now, my skin also gets really dry after I take off makeup, which I used for on camera, and this has helped me to kind of balance and protect at the same time. So I recommend that you try it, especially if you're a guy who doesn't really have a skincare routine. This is a great addition for you once a week. It's going to help your skin look fresher, look smoother, and it's going to make you feel much better. So consider trying it yourself. Also, if you have acne-prone skin like me, this is definitely one of the best products out there. And you can receive 15% off all products in the store and free shipping in the United States if you spend $70 or more. So check it out, link in the description. All right, back to the video. In essence, no one today is asking about Evergrande because people thought that, well, they probably solved the situation. But the report tells us that the accumulation of Evergrande's trouble is still happening. What do 2.4 trillion or 340 billion US dollars in liabilities look like? That's higher than some countries' entire GDP, like Colombia or Czech Republic or Romania. The problem is, remember how there are 700 Evergrande unsold apartment buildings, right? Evergrande is, as we speak, completely insolvent, which means that they can't pay back any of the debt they owned. Not enough money on hand, too much debt, too much non-performing debt. Non-performing loans are things that you lend money to but don't get a good return on. You essentially didn't make any money on the loan. According to official Chinese statistics, the total non-performing loan stock was under 3 trillion RMB at the end of 2022, and that's all of China. Let's assume this is true. If so, then Evergrande would account for nearly 60% of all non-performing loans in all of China. Something doesn't feel right. There's no way that one company is 60% of all non-performing loans of China. Something seems fishy. Also, China's ICBC Bank, which controls $4.3 trillion in capital is how much money they have. If Evergrande's debt were written off to zero, in other words, they wrote off the debt owed from Evergrande to ICBC, that would literally wipe off at least half of their entire capital. Because if you write off debt, it means the bank won't ask for the borrower to give the money back. And so if Evergrande was truly bailed out by the government, then the bank would immediately lose trillions in capital because of the debt write-off. So that means not only has the banks been unable to solve the Evergrande crisis because it's so large, they've essentially been leaving it there to grow much bigger than what was happening in 2021. They're waiting for the government to solve it. And they have to because, everything in China is controlled by the CCP. What this tells us is that the banks, the developers, and the consumers, they're all waiting for the Communist Party to do something. But what can they do? For 2 years since 2021, the CCP has been trying to help Evergrande only for its liabilities to grow bigger. This is no longer an economic problem, it's a political one for the CCP. But now you might be wondering, why do property developers go boom? Simply because local governments make money by selling land to developers, so it incentivizes developers to make more, build more, faster, stronger, the more that you build, the more land government sells and the more money for government. But it gets to a point where you basically have too much supply, not enough demand. In this case, no demand. And that's what happened after 3 years of COVID. No demand for house buying. And now the property developers, they control too many properties and they have decided that, what we're going to do is just flat out lay there and try to get the government to take over, plain dead. But the CCP created the bubble itself, so it can't just let it burst. So they have to save the big developers. After all, it is their own doing to make the bubble appear in the first place, trying to profit off of land sales. Basically, the head of Evergrande was like, hey CCP, hey boss, I've got myself in trouble and I got no money, a bunch of semi-finished projects, and a lot of angry customers. I'm gonna go to you. I'm gonna leave, but you take care of the rest. And then the CCP was like, sure, it's 2021, my economy isn't that bad yet, let me just swallow this all up. And now imagine it's 2023, the problem is happening to Country Garden too, another big guy, right? The CCP already has swallowed one development in its mouth. It has to fit another one in. And not only that, the first one it swallowed is growing inside its stomach. The first 2 quarters of this year have been so bad for the economy. If you're the boss of Country Garden, and then you saw what the CCP did for Evergrande, what would you do? You would be like, I'm a giant fatty waiting to blow up, 4 times the size of Evergrande. I'm still gonna come to you. And it's like, hey, I heard you took care of that last guy pretty well. I'm just gonna expect the same thing from you. I'm not gonna spend my own wealth trying to bail out my own company when in fact you'll do it for me because you're afraid that the bubble's gonna burst. And the CCP is fuming. They're straight up out of money. The banks can't swallow up the debt alone of one, but now there's the second one too. The local government, after 3 years of COVID, also has no money. Local banks have no money. There's no money in China. And that's not even the worst part yet. The CCP told Chinese developers like Country Garden to not lower the prices of their properties. How dumb is that? Well, it's the only way because they're saying now, despite you having no cash on hand to pay your interest rate, but the point is, it doesn't really matter now because we're still not letting you sell your properties for cheap to claw back some money. Again, it's pretty stupid, but it's simple why. The CCP created that big dead end in the property sector, this bursting bubble, right? It's an impossible puzzle to solve. The CCP also printed too much money trying to stimulate the economy. But all that money ended up into people's savings accounts because Well, I mean, people just don't want to spend money. So wealth accumulation in China is pretty high right now. The accumulation of bills has driven the country into deflation, no consumerism. And if the price of houses go down, it will instantly burst China's property bubble. You would think that if the price would go down and then people would immediately go and buy a bunch of houses, right? Mass purchasing of houses. Well, that's not quite how it works. Because imagine this, if one day a property goes on sale for discounting like 15%, the next day another guy's gonna say, well, we're gonna do 20% to outcompete the sales, right? And then the third day, another guy might say that it's gonna be 25% off everything. Imagine you're the guy who bought the 15%. Wouldn't you have wanted to wait for another day for that 25% or even 30%? This downward spiral only drives real estate to the bottom, to the point where no houses are worth anything. At that point, I mean, as a developer for a property, you're not making any money on the house anymore. So even those that bought houses at 15% at this point may feel like my investment's not worth anything anymore. And they could have gotten the same thing, I mean, 50%, 70% off, who knows? But that ever decreasing price would spell doom. And that's if consumers even buy it. Right now, people have lost confidence in the CCP. The credibility of China is reflected by the lack of consumerism. Because people know that after 3 years of COVID, which is filled, essentially it's a political movement, like what happened back in the Cultural Revolution. They're scared that the same thing could be repeated over and over again, just in a different form. And that's enough to scare people from buying long-term investments like a house. In other words, the political situation that the CCP created has caused it to be unable to solve two large problems at once. And the only way is to keep sweeping it under the rug, as they have that ability to absorb certain amount of trouble. But hint, it won't go away. All right, that's it, our topic on the growing crisis of the property sector featuring Evergrande and Country Garden. What do you think? Is it going to burst? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy the content, subscribe to our channel and leave a like below. And also make sure that you check out my sponsor, Blueberry Quality Products. Again, links in the description. All right, I'm David Zhang. This is China Insider. See you next time.